there is a different way to look at this where you say, actually, a bit of totalitarian state control of usage of social media may not necessarily be a bad thing.
Earlier this week, I had the pleasure of joining one of the most recognized news anchors in the UK, Piers Morgan, to discuss the potential ban of TikTok in the United States. When I informed Piers that China's government limits the amount of social media time for those under the age of 18, Piers had a surprising reaction and started thinking outside the box. Healthy debates are needed if we're going to understand complex issues like China. So let's jump into the debate and show you exactly how it went.
Is it time, many are asking, the West got wiser to the rising threat of China? Well, joining me now is the chair of the UK's Defence-led Committee, Tobias Ellwood, and geopolitical analyst Cyrus Jansen in the United States. Tobias Ellwood, let's take TikTok really as a kind of emblem of all this. TikTok is a phenomenal success story. There's not a young person and a few old people in the world who's not either familiar with it or using it. 1 billion users, 1 in 7 on the planet are using this. But China controls TikTok. There is a belief that China's state has a direct involvement in TikTok. Should we be more worried than we are about TikTok basically being used by the China state to hoover up information it can then use against us?
Yes, absolutely. China is taking advantage of the fact that it doesn't distinguish between military or civilian companies. It has a law that says that any company has to share data with the state. It uses TikTok as a way to control its own people. And this is spilling out to be able to watch what else is going on around the world. When I saw this story break that Canada, the United States, and indeed the EU were banning TikTok, but Britain had decided not to go down this route, I had flashbacks to that debate about Huawei that you might recall, where it took backbenchers, the likes of myself, Tom Tugendhat, and others, to get the government, the UK government, to flush out Huawei, this Chinese company, from British telecoms. And it's I think, a sign of the bigger picture that we're failing to grasp here, of how China is becoming more assertive, more abrasive, and exploiting the limitations, if you like, of our international rules-based order to further its own aggressive agenda. And we need to wake up to where all this is going. We're focused on Ukraine at the moment and Russia, but worst case scenario is that Russia and China start working together in this axis to redesign, if you like, our rules-based order, which, as I say, has become rather wobbly in the last 30 years.
OK, let's bring in Cyrus Jansen. You don't agree. Why?
I don't agree because what we have to fundamentally understand is how TikTok is actually 2 ecosystems, right? When we think of Facebook, for example, that's one platform. But the way that TikTok is structured is that there's actually 2 versions. You have one that is located domestically within China. The other one is actually TikTok that is around the world. So the one that is around the world, their servers are not located in mainland China. They store their data separately. The Chinese government does not have access to that. So it's a very, very clear thing that we need to understand is that there's 2 ecosystems here. Within mainland China, they use a version called Douyin. Now, Douyin is the domestic version that the Chinese government most definitely has control and access to. They'll be definitely censoring content there. But TikTok is a very different animal, and most people don't understand that distinction, Piers.
Well, you seem very trusting of that distinction and the separation of church and state when it comes to TikTok. But how can you be so sure? I mean, I wouldn't trust the Chinese in this kind of area of ownership of data, particularly of Western data, as far as I could throw them. Why are you so trusting?
Well, I think the main reason is up until this point, there has been no evidence of actually any harm to any American or foreign citizen in relations to national security. There's a huge evidence gap, and that's what we're seeing is that many of these concerns are completely overblown.
Well, Tobias, you're shaking your head. Why?
Well, because some American journalists were actually, their locations were found by the Chinese because of their use of TikTok. So I understand this call to say that there are 2 separate ecosystems, but can we trust the Chinese not to sort of equate the 2 or take advantage of the fact that they are owning this both of the ecosystems in the future? And this is what we need to wake up to, is where is our world going? What is China doing with all this data? It's as important now as terrain on the battlefield. And we need to recognize that we need to start to stand up to China. China is not abiding by our international rules and norms. When they do so, absolutely they should be included in the international community. But until they do so, then absolutely we should be joining the United States, Canada and the EU for blocking TikTok for the moment.
You know, when I was in Shanghai doing a documentary a few years ago about Shanghai, I'll address this to you, Cyrus. It was interesting because the Chinese government had tried to ban young Chinese kids, teenagers, from using social media. And they had 3,000 government employees, mainly based in Beijing, whose only job it was to stop the kids getting onto Twitter and I guess TikTok and all these other things at the time. But they were way behind the kids on this. The kids were way ahead of the government. They were leaps ahead of them. So they're all able to do this. So is it a case of the Chinese would like to have more control perhaps than they have, but they can't actually guarantee it because the kids are ahead of them?
Well, first of all, I watched that documentary you did in Shanghai. That was a fantastic insight. Really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
And I think this case is what's interesting is that Chinese social media is so popular within China, and it is absolutely part of the culture with young people now. I mean, I'm a creator on Chinese social media as well. I've made many videos on there, and it's an entire system that is very intertwined into society right now in China. So, you know, social media is a part of everybody's life in China, including young youth right now. I mean, many of them are on the platform and do so. What's interesting, though, Piers, is that the Chinese government has recognized that social media is a very big problem for all of us, right? We all have this social media addiction, this cell phone addiction, and they have started to put in regulations. For example, if you're under the age of 18, you know, you're going to be regulated to, for example, using Monday to Friday, you're going to have access for about 45 minutes a day on that social media platform. So it's different, certainly, than we have in, you know, the UK and Western nations where we have unlimited use. But what's interesting is a lot of parents that I talk to are like, wow, that's actually it's pretty good standard. You know, that's ideally what we want to have happen. It's just different. You know, China's government is able to, you know, input in those policies.
Right. I mean, Tobias Edward, there is another way of flipping this coin, isn't there? Which is use of social media, I think, is pretty much out of control in the West. Young people are spending inordinately long periods of time on this, probably to the detriment of their mental health. Certainly anxiety levels are through the roof because of things like Instagram and the algorithms and so on. You know, there is a different way to look at this where you say, actually, a bit of totalitarian state control of usage of social media may not necessarily be a bad thing for a country.
I'm surprised to hear you, Piers, promote a totalitarian state answer, a solution to
well,
what...
that wasn't exactly what I said. I phrased it very carefully, that when it comes specifically to the amount of time young people should be allowed to be exposed to these things, is there an argument that a totalitarian regime like China, the way they've gone about this in putting on a time control, is that a mad idea for, say, Britain to actually impose a similar time control on young people? I think young people spend way too much time on this stuff to their detriment.
I don't disagree with the amount of time people are spending on social media, on screens, indeed in front of TV, but I don't believe the state should be imposing its rules. And I certainly wouldn't be taking lessons from China that takes full advantage of, in the cover of these rules, to then spy on its own population, to actually control the message and to destroy any criticism, to arrest people who they say something against the state. That's not a direction of travel I would like to go down. The argument about how much we know we're on the screens every day, absolutely. That is something that culturally we need to discuss and address, because this essentially is a new concept. Did you and I have these screens when we were growing up? No, we didn't. So yes, we've got to come to terms with a new society. I don't believe anybody should be on social media who's anonymous. I believe you should actually be able to be accounted for. That way you wouldn't get all the horrible messaging that no doubt you get and parliamentarians get.
Well, but the trouble is that I've got to leave the debate here, unfortunately, but the trouble with that argument, unfortunately, is you go to a totalitarian state, you go to somewhere like Iran or China or whatever, actually the anonymity allows people that live there to post things they want to post which may be critical of the government. The moment
and get
you
arrested,
the anonymity,
and get arrested if they dare to criticise what the government is doing.
We
really don't want to go down that
obviously
road.
is completely wrong, but the one way the public in these countries can post stuff publicly is to do so anonymously. So that is the argument against removing anonymity on social media. Final word,
in fairness, though, Piers. Yeah, and in fairness, though, I mean, if you're going to be using Chinese social media, you do have to register your national ID card.
Right.
So there is an advantage into there because it does reduce the amount of spammers and people that are, that are doing this. And the other thing that we need to make sure that is heard is that Chinese citizens, they use social media to give feedback and criticisms to the Chinese government to help improve the society. Very common for Chinese government to make public policy adjustments based on outrage and outlashing of people on social media. Very common throughout China.
It's also very common, as it is in Russia, for people in government to read those messages and put the people who post them in prison. But we'll discuss that another day, gentlemen. One at a time. Thank you both very much indeed for joining me. I appreciate it.
Now, as you can see, Piers had to have the final word and made the classic Western assumption that if any Chinese citizen speaks out against the government, they will be put in jail. But is this really what happens in China? For context, look at this Twitter thread from Shanghai expat Anhua Bertrand, who shares, ahead of China's National Party Congress, People's Daily asked Chinese citizens to submit their complaints. They received tens of thousands, and CPC officials now have the obligation to reply to each single one of them with live tracking. All complaints and responses are public and listed on the website liuyan.people.com.cn. So what are most Chinese people complaining about? Well, typical responses are, we lack water irrigation here, arrange demolition for old housing there, or it's too difficult to change your social security card. So once again, don't believe everything you hear about China. There's a lot more nuance and perspectives needed if we are truly going to understand how China's government and how their system works. So everyone, what did you think of the Piers Morgan interview? Do you think that TikTok is a national security threat? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you for your amazing support, and I look forward to seeing you in our next video soon.